Linguistic Stories by Carrie Johns. Presentation Rationale. I decided to draw my inquiry from Sonia Nieto's 2010 Language, Culture, and Teaching, Critical Perspectives. So here's my critical question I asked myself when going into this project. What are the cultural and linguistic stories within my community? Basically, a community snapshot. I chose the picture of the stained glass window because I thought it was kind of a good metaphor for my community and my inquiry project. The window can be observed as one solid image, comprised of movement, colors, shapes, and lines. Also, one community with different language, cultures, stories, backgrounds, beliefs. When examined up close, one can see all of the individual pieces as separate little entities. Intricate patterns emerge that all comprise the larger picture or window which we view the world. So basically, the big picture would be the community as together. Pretty interesting when you go ahead and break down and do look at all the personal stories and where individuals have come from. So let's explore further. One way to take action in a more multiculturally aware education is to inquire into the community. The article Rethinking Multicultural Education shares, quote, one way is through interviews with parents and with community people in which they can recount their own stories, especially their interactions with institutions like schools, hospitals, and employment agencies. These are things that often don't get heard, end quote. This text also correlates with my community research project. Let's go ahead and look further at the basic summary of the community I live in, and we'll start to explore the individual experiences from there. What do some of the personal stories of English language learners look like within my community? Well, I live in North Denver, in Thornton, with an eclectic mix of ethnicities within my neighborhood. For this inquiry project, I decided to take a deeper look into linguistic experience and examine pieces of the racial, ethnic, and cultural makeup in my neighborhood. I walk around the neighborhood and wave hello, stop and chat. We have a couple closer friends that we hang out with, but you never really get to know anybody on a deeper level, on a more complete picture level. So, although we all live within the same geographic area, the same little pinpoint in Google Maps, it's interesting, however, when we closely examine that there are numerous contexts and cultural identities that emerge. Let's continue to explore the linguistic journey of three individuals and all the facets of language and cultural identity. Sonia Nieto states, quote, closely related to the dynamic nature of culture is that cultural identifications are multiple, eclectic, mixed, and heterogeneous. End quote. Nieto, page 138. When drawing up my interview questions, I had to ask myself, how can I make this, or how can I design the questions so they are explicit without being too prying? I also wanted them to think deeply about their experiences and go back and remember any uncomfortable situations, things that really stood out to them. But first of all, we covered just some basic stuff like background info, native language, where did you grow up, and what was your first or native language. If you don't mind sharing a bit about your family background and so on, please do so. Also, language exposure. So while growing up, in what ways were you exposed to language, academically, socially, and so on? Were you supported in the world of literacy? How you read to? Did you guys read as a family, and so on? When did you start learning English? And does any of your family speak English besides you? Also, I wanted to discuss their learning experience in school. So socially, that goes on the playground with friends. What was that identity like? And then what and how did you learn language? So were you textbook based? Did you do a lot of memorization, learning styles, grammar? Did you play games and so on? So I asked them to kind of think back and draw this information. Now, when you're sort of getting into more conceptual stuff, I asked, along the lines of what kind of English learning program did you experience? And was there anything that you particularly liked about your learning experience? Was there anything you would have changed? Then we went on to, did you have equal access to resources and a mix of curriculum materials besides white/European American-based resources? And if not, please explain your experience here. This class, I wanted to express, critically examined the lack of support for multiculturalism in the American school system. So I wanted them to have kind of a critical mindset when answering these questions, not just trying to please the teacher and make everything sound good. One thing I asked here is, did you ever feel that you were treated as having a language deficit rather than an extra language resource? Please explain any cultural challenges in and out of school. And then I wanted to think of if they had any other situations where you could have been culturally supported even better, whether the programs, so on, that looking back you would have realized would have made a big difference. Let's go ahead and explore our linguistic learner number 1. Mai Nguyen is originally from Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. She said Saigon is the old name, and she is in her 50s. She attended public school in Ho Chi Minh City where everyone within school and the community spoke Vietnamese, no English. Her family in Vietnam do not read or write in Vietnamese. Mai started learning English in 6th grade, and she took 2 to 3 hours of lessons per week. Learning English was a part of the curriculum within her public school. During these weekly lessons, Mai mainly learned English vocabulary and grammar, with little to no practice in the domains of listening and speaking. A large majority of her learning in English class took place in the form of written responses, vocabulary, and grammar worksheets. She really had more rote-style learning and not many meaningful interactions or opportunities to acquire English. So basically, she was kind of lacking in the conceptual idea of the socio-cultural pedagogy. After completing public school, she decided to attend university in the United States and moved here at the age of 20. She moved to Aurora with a family to help her integrate and get on her feet. This was before starting college. She said she was very nervous attending college in the United States as her listening and speaking were not very good, but she could read and write well enough. So again, she really had that kind of academic basic grammar down, just her listening and speaking and the socio-context of everything needed development. Before starting classes in the United States, she attended an ESL class that she said was helpful. During this class, she mentioned she had a lot more opportunity to practice speaking with other ELL students. They would role play and choose correct vocabulary for the specified context. This made me think of the Walkie article in Zone of Proximal Development and Scaffolding. He had talked about 3 different scaffolding steps. So the first one was, and this is on page 164 of Walkie, 1, planned curriculum progression over time, so a project, a classroom ritual, and this was kind of those structure systems with this ESL class before attending college that allowed her to feel confident and have some consistency. The second step was procedures used, so she said they mentioned going over how basically school would work and what that would look like, some of the basic academic structures. And then really here with working with partners and role-playing, this made me think directly of the zone of proximal development and collaborative process of interaction. And she said this was probably the most helpful thing. So I think that's interesting that that's exactly what we're studying now. And she found that to be the most applicable for her situation. So that was interesting to hear what worked and what didn't work. I think it's a balance of learning and acquiring. So she needed to get the textbook and all the grammar rules and vocabulary down, and then kind of get that socio-contextual influence as well. So it's kind of a mix of the both that has created just such a successful individual. I asked mine towards the end of the interview how they culturally identify. Are they American? Are they Vietnamese American? And she said they are Vietnamese. I believe this has to do with them not reaching outside of the Vietnamese community. We have a large Vietnamese community in Denver in general and in Thornton, especially in our neighborhood, which is amazing. I think it would be a little bit easier for them to hang out with other friends that were non-Vietnamese had they had that rich social experience. And I bring this up because mine mentioned, quote, she never had opportunities to practice speaking. This lack of confidence in speaking has influenced her social identity. Mai expressed that she and her husband, Thai, only spend time outside of their work with Thai's Vietnamese family. Mai told me, quote, if we spent time with American friends, the learning of speaking would be much faster, end quote. So again, tying this into the socio-cultural context, I'm drawing on Walkie again. According to Walkie, quote, social interaction is the basis of learning and development. Learning is a process of apprenticeship and internalization in which skills and knowledge are transformed from the social into the cognitive plane. End quote. Walkie, page 160. Providing meaningful social experiences during the English learning process allows students to build confidence and construct meaningful interactions outside of one's normal social group. With a more successful social integration would allow Mai's family to integrate more outside of the Vietnamese community. And of course, there's nothing wrong with just identifying as being Vietnamese. Their two younger children, who are both out of college actually, she says they identify as more as American. They have very English-based friends, and then they also have like their family that they kind of code switch, and they do kind of an interconnected Vietnamese American identity. So it's a good blend of it all, and they're a successful, happy family. So that can be attributed to a high level of intrinsic motivation and also strong family support. This is a linguistic story of Daniel Oliver. He's born in Juarez, Chihuahua, Mexico. His native language is Spanish. He works as a banker at Wells Fargo and attended a couple years of college. He has advanced to expanding bridging on some of the grammar. Moved to the United States when he was 16-year-old with the basic conversation skills. He said his mom is from Mexico City and his dad is from Juarez. They moved to Mexico City after his dad traveled on a school trip to Mexico City, and they got married and had kids. He has two other siblings, a sister and a brother. He says they moved to the United States in 2001, and they only knew one other family in Colorado. They moved to the Longmont area. My siblings and I started school that same year without knowing much English, he said. We were enrolled in an ESL program along with other basic classes. He mentioned he was able to move to regular English class in 2 years, and he eventually enrolled to more advanced classes. He also mentioned that he went into a full immersion program and that he thought that was a positive thing because it pushed him to learn English. He said, I've always been fascinated by the English language and found it interesting. So he actually had his parents enroll him in Mexico into an English-speaking class there, where he attended class outside of regular public schooling. So he really had a lot of a positive outlook on learning another language, particularly English, which helped with him acquiring it. So he had a positive outlook there. When I asked about his literacy and support of literacy in the home, he said, I come from a Baptist Christian family. We had lots of Bible readings, and we were involved in church activities, which included memorizing verses, reading out loud, and singing, which he said helped him learn English a lot better. My mom was always very involved in what was going on in school, homework, and etc. So again, he had a lot of parent involvement in his English learning process. He said, my dad loves to read and is very informed. He's always been the person to go to for any questions. He said by the time they moved to Colorado, I had asked if what his English speaking experience was like. He said, I still could have a conversation by the time we moved to Colorado. Once we got here, the reason to learn English was more of a need than want, but to me it was kind of the same. So we went on and discussed his experience here, and I said, I want you to think critically about your experience here and what helped you kind of get acclimated to the school setting and so on. Um, he said, while being in ESL, we had special support. We had lots of textbooks and sometimes extracurricular activities. So it seemed like a well-rounded program. And one thing that was interesting, I believe what Sonia Nieto talked about, a 60-40-10 program where kids start speaking English at a low level and they have more Spanish influence at first, and then it kind of gradually leads from Spanish. Well, Daniel said that he actually learned from having more integration, full English at first, and then more Spanish towards the end. So they had more Spanish speaking, and were allowed to speak more Spanish when they had a lot more complicated questions. And he said that was great because the full immersion kind of forced him to speak English. So this is kind of contradictory to a little bit what's in Sonia Nieto's book, but he said, but again, that support, that second language support is there, which was really important, and he felt valued, and he said he never really felt like an outsider. He said one time 2 PE teachers got frustrated because he couldn't speak, and he felt kind of embarrassed about that, and they were just kind of looking at each other not so nicely. But he said for the most part his experience was great, and he said, actually interesting, the biggest problem comes from the students themselves not opening up to a new culture and not socializing and segregating themselves. So again, this is just one linguistic story, but a positive one. Daniel was very motivated to learn English. He didn't have a lot of the resistant theory stuff going on that Sonia Nieto mentions. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but in this case, he thought the full immersion was great, which was kind of cool. And yeah, so very interesting talking to him. He wants his 2 younger children to speak both English and Spanish. The oldest kid is 5, and she's actually having some speech problems, and they're trying to figure out and attribute that to either too much of Spanish English, or if she's actually having a little bit of a learning problem. So they don't think they're overdiagnosing that, but just kind of interesting. They're kind of figuring out what's going on there. So it was really interesting talking to Daniel and hearing about his perspective and his language program, because it was so different than what we've learned this semester. Keeping in alignment with text references, I just want to emphasize again that Daniel expressed that when he first entered school, he had a full immersion English program. He said that he liked full immersion as it pushed him to learn English. As his English progressed, they incorporated more Spanish to help him with more complicated questions. Daniel mentioned it was hard at first, but never felt oppositional behavior, because I had asked him to think critically about it, and if he felt like he kind of belonged in the system and so on. So in regards to Nieto, she refers to the oppositional theory, which I just kind of wanted to correlate these 2 together. And some students do feel that opposition because they don't feel involved, and maybe they don't. He was allowed to speak some Spanish, so I think he felt valued. Nieto refers to, quote, involuntary minority students may choose to engage in what Agbu called oppositional behavior, emphasizing cultural behaviors that differentiate them from the majority and are in opposition to it. Nieto, page 94. Not having a feeling of oppositional behavior helps students to feel intrinsically motivated to learn a new language. It is key as a teacher to not portray a white-dominant view in our teaching and use a mix of materials that support and express new culture so everybody can feel included. Just wanted to emphasize this. I thought it was an interesting aspect of our sit-down talk. This is the linguistic story of our 3rd profile here. This is Anne Lee. Anne was born in Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, such as our first linguistic profile, Mai. He said he came to the United States when he was 8 years old, and he moved to Grand Junction, Colorado. What a shock, from Vietnam. He said that he lived with his mom and grandparents on his mom's side, and this was in 1991. He said, my mom required me to learn the ABCs before I came to the U.S., and that's all he knew. He said he was reading books basically meant for children from 2 to 6 years old. He said, when I arrived in Montrose, Colorado, in 1991, so actually not Grand Junction, Montrose, kind of same area, the school had me enrolled in an ESL program. So I asked him about that and how that went. He said, during English class, I would be excused to go join the other ESL kids. He said, mostly Mexican, to grasp the basics of the English language. He said he didn't feel segregated because we talked about the pull-out version of ESL, and he said that it helped him to learn English quickly. So I guess he didn't have any kind of negative viewpoint on that. During English class, I would be excused to join the other ESL kids. He said they would sit down and they would do games and they would learn basically vocabulary and also do a little bit of like role playing, which would support that DPD, donor toxin development. He said, I learned the basics of English from ESL class, but obtained fluency from social studies. He mentioned that when he would go play with other children, they would just run around and play, and that's where he kind of learned all his social language. He says, most of the materials I learned referenced Western civilization, so I wasn't exposed to Eastern social studies until high school, when world history was available. We spoke mainly Vietnamese at home, but as I spent more time with friends, so my Vietnamese began to become more fragmented. My grandparents didn't speak English except for few words they learned from watching American movies, and my mom learned fluent English through graduating college and working with Americans. One tool I wished I would have had, I asked him about other resources, and looking back, what would be helpful, and he mentioned that he had mentioned he wanted, or Google Translate would have been helpful. The ESL program I couldn't didn't do direct translations, which is understandable because of limited resources. I think that if I had the ability to directly translate my thoughts from my native language, my communication skills would be more effective. So looking back and thinking on this interview in a critical way, he mentioned not having the resources until high school. I think that's just too late. It's a good thing his mom is very academically involved. If not, he might have felt a little bit disconnected. What Sonia Mieta talks about, incorporating different cultural influences via books and viewpoints and so on. But not to have that until high school, I guess could be detrimental for some students that are lacking that kind of support. Overall, Anne said that he had a very positive experience in school. He said they had very good teachers that were very helpful and went out of their way to make him comforted by saying hello and partnering him up with other students to show him around and help him navigate the school way on a daily basis. Anne said, I adapted quick because I would just go out and play with other kids and run around. This helped to make the move easier. One of the strangest things was just the scenery, playing on farms, and horses were a lot different than Vietnam. I learned all my social talk with friends, end quote. And also mentioned that his teachers did hold a high standard for him, and his mom did too, so this helped him to succeed. One important aspect, I think, that really exemplifies all the people I had interviewed is in Sonia Mieta's 2010 Language Care and Teaching subtopic. She mentions it's important to go beyond just the general caring and really hold students to high academic standards and rigor, which was the case for all three of these individuals, and it's really made a huge impact on the rest of their lives, so it's extremely important. In summary, all three individuals I sat down and talked with have successful school stories. They all felt valued and challenged in their programs. Although two of them experienced full immersion programs, they expressed it was helpful in acquiring and learning English as it forced them to learn, which sometimes you just need as long as they're being supported and valued. So I think it's important to look at many aspects within the full immersion program. I believe these individuals in interviews have helped me to further see the importance of truly caring for students by providing a challenging and, like Mia said, a high, rigorous standard and environment. I realize not every student gets the chance to be a part of a positive, supportive ELD program, and because of this, we need to scaffold students so they can socially and academically be successful and feel like they are key components of school and society. There are 7 basic characteristics from Sonia Nieto 2010 Critical Perspectives that I thought were really important to remember as an educator, and especially as an educator of multicultures. First thing, multicultural education is anti-racist education. 2, multicultural education is basic education. 3, multicultural education is important for all students, not just students who have other languages other than English. Every student, white European student, needs to realize there's a whole world out there and we need to support all cultures. 4, multicultural education is pervasive, so it's ever increasing. Nieto states that we have more minority students, if you will, increasing in the school system every year. We need to be pervasive and inclusive. 5, multicultural education is education for social justice. We need to speak out and be advocates of that as an educator. 6, multicultural education is a process. So we need to respect the process and realize there needs to be background and support and scaffolding, among other things. 7, multicultural education is critical pedagogy. If we're not critically thinking about how we're affecting the students and what their viewpoints are and if they're supported, we are failing as an educator. Again, it's from Nieto, page 68. Thank you for taking the time to watch my presentation. Although all 3 of my linguistic stories are from the same community, they're all successful stories, and I know that not all of them are. If I were to go into a different community and interview, maybe in a different neighborhood with not such a middle class socioeconomic status, I would get other stories, and that's one thing I think I should have done and intermixed a little more. But I think it's important to realize the different aspects in a community and kind of see where everybody's coming from, see the other side of the story. So thank you so much for taking time again, and talk to you later.